After I got into a serious car crash, my fiancé, a social media consultant, chose to attend her best friend's concert instead of visiting me in the hospital. I didn't yell, I didn't argue. I simply went home, packed my belongings, and left a note that read, "I hope the show was worth it. My name is Ethan Miller, I'm 32, and I work as a project manager for a construction company downtown. My life is structure, schedules, budgets, deadlines. I'm not the loud guy, but when I speak, I'm heard." That was always enough for me. My fiancée, Olivia, 29, was the complete opposite. She ran her own social media consultancy. She lived between filters, hashtags, and motivational quotes. Her followers considered her authentic, though I knew how many layers of editing were behind every smile. And then there was Leo Fox, her inseparable best friend since college, a directionless musician, more popular for his style than his talent. One of those who reek of broken promises and survive thanks to whoever keeps them close. He had charm, yes, but the kind that rents out charisma and postpones ambition. The first time I met him, he walked into my apartment as if it were his own. He greeted me, opened the fridge, and poured himself a drink. Then he told me with a smile, "You're lucky. Olivia is one of a kind." I returned the gesture without giving him the satisfaction of a reaction. In my head, I was already measuring the distance between the door and his ego. My friend Chris, a co-worker and a specialist in irony, noticed what I wasn't ready to accept. After meeting them once, he said, "That's not a best friend. That's a boyfriend without a contract." I laughed. I thought he was exaggerating. Love often makes us generous with excuses. By spring, Olivia's career began to take off. She posted positive affirmations at dawn, chased clients who paid late, and fell asleep comparing her life to others. Every argument ended the same way. "You don't support me." But I did. I paid the rent, the car insurance, the subscriptions, and cooked dinner while she edited videos until midnight. The problem wasn't support. It was attention. And Leo was always close by. He would show up with a new song, play it half-finished, and lounge on the sofa while she praised him. Gradually, his toothbrush settled into our bathroom. "It's not a big deal," she told me when I asked. But it was. The breaking point came on our second anniversary. I made a reservation at a quiet restaurant, the kind where no one photographs their plate. I had booked it a month in advance and even printed the confirmation. Naive me. At 6:30 p.m., I was at the table. At 7 p.m., a text. "Sorry, babe. Leo had a rehearsal for his show, and I promised to help him with content." There was no call, no promise to make it up. Just that. I replied, "Do what you deem necessary." I paid for a drink I didn't want and left. The night was cold and the air smelled of metal and disappointment. I called Chris. "Where are you?" he asked. "Restaurant, table for 2, dinner for 1. He didn't say anything else. "Just stay there. I'll be there in 10 minutes. He showed up on time. He sat across from me, ordered 2 bourbons, and joked, "I'm paying because this already looks like therapy." We talked about work, sports, anything but her, until my phone lit up. "Is it her?" he asked. "Probably posting stories," I replied. He laughed. "You're dating a one-person public relations agency." I almost smiled. Almost. Olivia arrived past midnight, smelling of the stage and cheap beer. I was on the sofa finishing a report. She didn't even greet me before starting her speech. It was important for him, you understand? He needed my help. I closed the laptop and replied calmly, "And our anniversary dinner needed yours." Her tone quickly shifted. "Are you overreacting? It was just dinner." "It was a choice," I said. "Are you being controlling?" I slowly stood up. "I'm not controlling, Olivia. I'm just starting to see things clearly." She fell silent. She looked at me as if this version of me were unfamiliar. I went to the bedroom. She stayed in the living room, typing incessantly on her phone. I imagined the post. Relationships are about communication. At 2 a.m., the light from her screen woke me. She was reading the comments on her latest post. In the list, Leo's name stood out among the hearts and fire emojis. She was smiling as she watched it. I turned and stared at the ceiling. I remembered Chris's words. "That's not a friend." And he was right. The next morning, Olivia was gone, having only left a note on the fridge. "Love you. Don't forget breakfast." Not an apology, not a reference to the night before. I crumpled the paper and tossed it in the trash. Outside, the city woke up as always. cars, noise, routine. But inside me, something had already broken, though without a sound. I had started leaving without even announcing it. That night I stayed late at the office. Everyone had left, except for the murmur of the fans and the hum of the lights. Chris peered in before leaving. "Don't die at your desk, boss. You make us look bad." "Too late," I replied. "I already make us look bad." He laughed and left, leaving me with my thoughts and the sound of air moving through the ducts. Outside, the rain began to fall on the asphalt, and the smell of burnt coffee mixed with the certainty that, without scandal or shouting, my relationship had ended that night, even if Olivia didn't know it yet. I loosened my tie as I left the building and crossed the parking lot while the rain slid off the car roofs and formed rivers on the pavement. I got into my car, started the engine, and let the radio fill the silence. The drive home was peaceful, almost hypnotic. The streetlights reflected on the windshield, turning into diffused lines that stretched with every falling drop. My shoulders ached after 12 hours of uninterrupted tension. I thought about Olivia, how distant she had become lately. Her voice seemed to soften whenever she spoke to Leo, but with me it turned cold, sharp. The phone vibrated on the passenger seat, heading to Leo's to plan for the concert. Big night, not a "how are you," not a "drive safe," just that. I turned it face down and kept driving. The rain started falling harder. I slowed down as I took the exit toward my neighborhood. The last clear memory was the flash of a blue car swerving into my lane. The driver was looking at their phone, oblivious. Then came the collision, a metallic crash, the airbag exploding against my chest, the smell of gunpowder and burnt rubber. Everything went white, then black, and finally, there was only an endless ringing. When I regained consciousness, the air smelled of rubber and smoke. Every breath was a reminder that my ribs weren't right. The windshield was covered in cracks, and silver threads of rain filtered through them. Outside, traffic had stopped. Distant horns and curious faces peered out between the cars. I pushed the door open with effort and fell half-kneeling onto the cold asphalt. The frigid air snapped me back to the present. The paramedics arrived soon after. I gave them my name and answered in short sentences. Pain is better endured when you don't describe it. They placed me on a stretcher, secured me with straps, and loaded me into the ambulance. The siren cut through the silence of the city where I had built my entire life. I woke up in a white room smelling of disinfectant and metal. A nurse adjusted the IV and explained I was lucky. Bruised ribs, a mild concussion, but nothing that wouldn't heal in time. On the bedside table was my phone. I took it with a trembling hand. Adrenaline was still coursing through my body. I had no missed calls, just unimportant notifications. I called Olivia. She answered on the second ring. I heard music, laughter, and the murmur of several voices. "What's up, babe?" she said. "I'm getting ready." I recognized Leo's voice in the background, speaking to her confidently. "I had an accident," I told her. Silence. 2 exact seconds. "What? Are you okay? Was it serious?" she asked, though her tone didn't sound genuinely worried. "I'm at the hospital," I replied. "Bruised ribs, a mild concussion." "Oh, honey, that sounds awful, but you're in good hands. No, I can't cancel on Leo tonight. He's been preparing this concert for months." "Right," I said slowly. "You wouldn't want to disappoint him." She let out a nervous laugh. "Do you know how much this means to him? I promise I'll come see you tomorrow. Love you." And she hung up. I was left listening to the steady beep of the monitor. I felt neither anger nor sadness, just an icy calm, sharper than either. I was discharged the next morning. They offered me a wheelchair, but I preferred to walk. The pain was still there, stabbing with every step, but I wasn't going to stop. Chris was waiting for me in the lobby with a coffee in one hand and my jacket in the other. "You look rough," he said. "Perfect," I replied. "It matches how I feel." He set the cup on the tray. "I heard about the crash. Are you okay?" "Never better." He looked at me carefully, searching for what I wasn't saying. "Did you call her?" "Yes. She had other plans." He sighed. "Of course." We walked together down the hallway. The air outside was cold and clean, as if trying to erase what had come before. Chris opened his truck. "Where to?" he asked. "Home." "For now," he repeated, starting the engine. As we drove away, the hospital shrank in the side mirror. I saw my reflection, the same face, but with something different in my gaze. Some things break suddenly, with noise. Others simply stop working without warning. Last night, our relationship stopped working, and she didn't even notice. I arrived home past noon. The painkiller had worn off, and every breath reminded me of my injured ribs. But I moved anyway. There were no shouts or scenes, only action. The apartment seemed like an empty stage after the show. On the counter, the light from her ring light was still on, next to a makeup palette and her connected laptop. The scent of her perfume hung in the air, sweet and artificial. I took a deep breath and started. I took the suitcase out of the closet and packed my clothes, my shoes, my tools, everything I had bought with my money. I moved calmly. The pain was constant, but it didn't stop me. I didn't open her closet, nor did I touch her things. I didn't want to leave traces or destroy anything. I wanted silence, a clean, definitive silence. When I finished packing, I canceled the internet account, packed the router and the cable box in a box. Everything was in my name. The insurance contract, the lease, the car. Every thread of that life ran through me, and now I was cutting them one by one. I sat at the kitchen counter with my laptop open, the soft sound of rain filtering through the window. The clock showed 9 p.m., and the apartment was silent, save for the electric hum of the refrigerator. I took a deep breath and began to close, one by one, the tabs that represented fragments of her life intertwined with mine. First, the phone plan. I logged into the carrier's portal, and after a few clicks, Olivia's line was deactivated. Digital silence. Then, the additional credit card I had added to my account, reported as lost, canceled without hesitation. Every confirmation that arrived in my email was like a hammer blow of reality. Then I reviewed the utilities, electricity, gas, internet, all scheduled to start at the new address on the day I signed the contract. The lease termination notice had already been sent to the landlord, with the full month's payment included. Each email confirming a change gave me a sense of control, as if every process were a screw tightening a structure that had been falling apart for months. Halfway through, a sharp pain shot through my ribs. I had to lean on the counter and take a deep breath. The body complains, I thought, but the mind doesn't always have to listen. I straightened up and continued. When I finished, I walked through the rooms slowly. The walls still held the scent of her perfume and the echo of our conversations, but nothing of us remained there. Everything that belonged to her stayed where it was. What reminded me of a phase I no longer wanted to drag along went into a box. By the time the sun began to set, the apartment was hollow, silent, as if we had never lived there. The sound of my steps echoed on the empty floor and confirmed what I already knew. That place no longer belonged to me. It was just a shell, a shadow of what was once home. I took a pen and one of her notebooks, the same one where she used to jot down ideas for her posts. On the first page, she had scrawled motivational phrases, genre self-improvement, or Monday motivation, or our focus. I turned it over and wrote a single sentence. I hope the show was worth it. Leo is your priority. I left the note next to her laptop in the center of the counter. I didn't need speeches or recriminations, just a brief truth, as cold as it was clean. An hour later, there was a knock at the door. It was Chris with 2 boxes in his arms and his usual calm expression. He had that look of someone who understands without you having to explain anything. "I didn't think you'd do it this fast," he muttered when he saw me. "I don't like to stand still," I replied. He walked in, looked at the empty place, and sighed. "Clean break," he said at last. "Exactly what I was aiming for." He started carrying my boxes to his truck while I finished packing what was left. We didn't talk much. It wasn't necessary. Every silence was heavy, but not from awkwardness, but from understanding. Before leaving, I stood at the door for a moment. In front of me, a wall full of photographs of Olivia laughing with Leo Fox, posing under lights, holding her camera, smiling in places that seemed designed only for her vanity. Everything felt empty. I closed the door. The rain had returned, and the air smelled of wet asphalt. Chris started the engine without turning on the radio. Only the constant sound of tires on the damp street could be heard. "Where to?" he asked without looking at me. "To your place," I replied. "No, seriously. My parents live an hour away. I don't want to go back home. I want silence. A place where I don't think about her when I sleep. He nodded slowly. Perfect. I'll set up the sofa. No sermons, just rest. The drive was quiet. The city lights slid across the windshield like neon threads unraveling with every curve. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without that constant pressure on my chest. When we arrived, he helped me with the boxes. His apartment was small, functional, almost austere. Tools on the shelves, a workbench in one corner, a couple of old records, and a steaming coffee maker. The smell of oil, metal, and something I hadn't felt in a long time. Calm. Chris tossed me a key. The couch is yours. If you want coffee tomorrow, you know where the kettle is. I collapsed onto the sofa. The springs creaked, but exhaustion held me fast. I didn't call her. I didn't check her social media. I didn't want to know if she had seen the note, or if the light I left on in the kitchen was still shining. For the first time, ignorance felt like freedom. Chris sat on his workbench and started taking apart an old clock. You did the hard thing, he said after a while. The hard thing is staying, I replied. Leaving is just logistics. He chuckled softly. Then, Mr. Logistics, go to sleep. I turned off the lights. The pain was still there, but it didn't break me. Outside, the city breathed. Inside, silence became an ally. Before falling asleep, I thought about the note. I imagined her reading it with the lamp illuminating the words. No drama. No audience. Just the truth laid bare. Chris walked silently on the other side of the room, and his mere presence was enough to keep me steady. I didn't leave out of anger. I left out of precision. And at dawn, Olivia would find the apartment just as I left it. Empty, clean, finally at peace. That night, while she enjoyed her concert with Leo, the city kept turning, oblivious to the small collapse I was leaving behind. I can imagine her return. The sound of her heels, the loud laugh, the door slam, and then the sudden silence as she noticed the emptiness. What once loudly proclaimed our life now looked like an abandoned stage after a mediocre performance. My things were gone. Her equipment was still on the counter, and a folded note rested next to the laptop. I didn't need to see her to imagine her reaction. First, confusion, then recognition, and finally, fury. An hour later, the first email arrived. Are you crazy? Then a text message. You can't just disappear like this. And then an avalanche of audios, crying, broken phrases, accusations. You're manipulative, Ethan. This is emotional abuse. I didn't reply. I let the notifications pile up until the sound lost all meaning. By dawn, I had already signed a new lease, a small apartment near the industrial sector. No luxuries, white walls, a refrigerator that barely hummed, and best of all, absolute silence. I called Chris. I need help with the last boxes. Give me the address, was all he replied. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like every step I took had direction. It wasn't a flight, it was a reconstruction. When he texted a simple "on my way," I knew I didn't have to say more. In less than an hour, we had unloaded everything from the truck. He didn't talk much, and I appreciated that. When we finished, he patted me on the shoulder and said with a half smile, "Call me if you need anything that isn't closure." Then he left, leaving me alone with the silence. That night, I slept on a mattress on the floor. There were no ring lights on, no scent of her perfume floating through the room, no voice practicing content ideas at 2 a.m. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like rest. By the middle of the week, Olivia had already transformed her sadness into a branding strategy. Her social media profile filled with vague phrases about self-improvement and recycled quotes. "Sometimes you have to lose yourself to find yourself," read one caption. Accompanied by a crying selfie in front of the mirror, comments called her brave. I called it an act. Leo appeared in the first post, smiling, feigning support. By the weekend, he had disappeared. No tags or mentions. I didn't need to guess why. The rent wasn't being paid, subscriptions were canceled, and the perks were gone. When the privileges end, so does the loyalty. On Friday, I received a text from Chris. "Bar. You have to see the circus she's putting on tonight." We met at our usual spot by the river, a modest place with cheap beer, decent burgers, and dim light that didn't judge anyone for their past. Chris scrolled through his phone with an amused smile. She's doing a 5-part TTK-style video series on abandonment and healing. This one is called When They Leave Without Giving Closure. I took a sip of my beer and said, "She always loved the spotlight." He nodded. "You know you're the villain in her story now?" "I was just the lighting technician," I replied. "I simply stopped fixing the spotlights." We shared that tired laughter that doesn't seek mockery but relief, the kind only understood by men who have already weathered the storm. The following week, the messages started to space out, though they didn't disappear. They went back and forth between guilt and manipulation. "I just want to talk." "I hope you're happy destroying lives." I didn't respond to any of them. She wasn't seeking an apology. She wanted a reaction, and I wasn't going to give her one. On Thursday, as I finished a meeting, the receptionist spoke to me over the intercom. "There's someone asking for you," she said, sounding uncomfortable. I looked out the window and saw Olivia's car poorly parked, angled across 2 spots. She was leaning against the door, wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy sky, her shoulders shaking. I knew that kind of performance well. I walked out to the parking lot. She ran toward me with smudged mascara and a broken voice. "You can't just disappear. Who does that to someone they love?" I stopped a few feet away. "You left me stranded in a hospital, Olivia." I just made it official. "That's not fair," she countered through sobs. "You could have told me it was that serious." "I did tell you, but you chose not to disappoint Leo. You're being cruel." "No," I replied. "I'm just done." She straightened up, trying to regain control. "Do you think you're better than me? And you think people won't know what you did? That they won't support me?" I looked at her without flinching. "They already do." I turned and walked back into the building. I heard her scream something, but I didn't bother to decipher it. Inside, the receptionist looked like she wanted to ask what happened. I just said, "She's lost," and went back to work. That night in my new apartment, I opened a beer and turned on my laptop. The air was still. The city noise barely filtered through the window. I didn't search for anything about her, but things still reached me. Chris texted me. She posted another emotional closure video. "You're trending," I replied. "Perfect. Maybe now she'll get the attention she wanted." He sent a thumbs up. I lay back on the sofa and watched the light fade on the ceiling. The storm was over. The chaos was now hers. Peace made no sound. It was absence. The space she once filled with drama was now occupied only by silence, and for the first time in months, I slept without dreaming. A week after that scene in the parking lot, I decided to share my version. Not to vent or to seek revenge, but to release the burden of the noise. I opened Reddit and wrote everything in simple sentences without embellishments or judgment. Just the facts, the accident, the concert, the note, the silence. I posted and closed my laptop. An hour later, the notifications started. Hundreds, then thousands of comments. Most were from men who recognized the pattern. Same story, different setting. And somehow, that was enough. For the first time, I didn't feel alone in all of it. One comment caught my eye among all that appeared that night. "This time, brother, it's the storm coming." I couldn't help but laugh. That phrase reminded me of a video game I used to play where the protagonist's calm preceded the chaos. I hadn't thought a simple post of mine would gain so much visibility, but by the next day, it was on the front page. It was as if the entire internet had been waiting for a spark of raw honesty to ignite a collective bonfire. Private messages started pouring in from people I didn't know. Some were grateful, people telling me that what I had done gave them the courage to leave similar situations. Others shared their own stories, as if they had been waiting for years for someone to act for them. There were also those who called me cruel, vengeful, and insensitive. But even among the reproaches, there was a tinge of envy. Most of those voices would have wanted to have the calm and precision to react the same way, but they never dared. Only a few hours passed before someone connected the dots. A user with too much free time tracked down Olivia's public account, compared the dates, and confirmed her identity with old photos still floating around the internet. In less than 2 days, her name began circulating in all corners of social media, and not for good reasons. Her posts about healing processes and self-love were filled with sarcastic comments. A few defended her, but the majority pointed her out mercilessly. Screenshots of her old videos, where she spoke about the importance of fidelity, communication, and choosing your partner over drama. began to be shared alongside recent images where she proclaimed herself a victim of emotional abuse. The contradiction was so evident that even the best scriptwriter couldn't have written it better. Within days, 2 small brands quietly canceled their collaborations with her. Another published an ambiguous statement about maintaining consistency with corporate values. I felt no pride, but also no guilt. She had built her audience and sold a carefully curated image. The public simply decided to stop buying it. That night, Chris came home with takeout and a mocking smile, holding his phone. He slumped onto the sofa and said, laughing, "Listen to this." He read aloud one of her new posts, healing from narcissistic abuse, one boundary at a time. Then he looked at me incredulously. "Bro, if anyone was the narcissist here, it was her." I gave a tired laugh. "Well, at least she's practicing self-awareness, even if it's for publication." Chris shook his head and added, "You've officially reached the status of peaceful villain. You said nothing. And she burned her reputation all by herself." "That's how fires start," I replied. "You're the friction then," he joked. "No," I said, pouring myself a drink. "I'm the silence." We ate without saying much else. The laughter that followed was quiet, not to disguise pain, but to acknowledge that there was nothing left that hurt. I put the phone on the counter and leaned back on the sofa. The orange light of the city filtered through the blinds, drawing lines on the wall. I thought that, somewhere, Olivia was still trying to make sense of her version of events, reinventing herself for an audience that no longer wanted to listen. But for me, the story had ended long ago. There was no revenge, no remorse, no pride, just the serene satisfaction of knowing that the truth, sooner or later, always finds its way. I opened the window and let the cold night air clear my head. I closed my eyes. The noise was gone, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't miss it. It all started with a message that appeared one Tuesday morning. The name wasn't familiar to me. Camille Aranda. The subject line only said, "You don't know me, but I know Leo." I opened the message with curiosity. Camille introduced herself as his ex and told me she had seen my post. She wanted to show me something. She attached screenshots, proof of transfers, and photographs. They were evidence of all the lies he had told. He wasn't just unfaithful. He was a con artist. He had taken money from several women under the pretext of investing in his non-existent music career. Camille had the entire file and was ready to make it public. "Do it," I replied, and on Friday she did. Her post exploded within hours. Audios, messages, fake invoices, everything was exposed. The artist Leo Fox became synonymous with fraud. Venues that hired him canceled his performances. His profile was reported, and his followers disappeared like smoke. The man who claimed to dominate the stage couldn't even get an open mic night now. I didn't comment, didn't share, didn't boast. Karma alone had better aim than any revenge of mine. A few days later, I received an unexpected email. The sender was Olivia's mother. The subject line just said, "We are sorry." The message was brief but full of shame and sadness. She explained that they were aware of everything, that Olivia was home trying to pull herself together. She didn't justify what happened. She just hoped that one day I could find peace. But peace was no longer a problem. Mine was intact. A few weeks passed before Olivia reappeared on social media. Her new narrative was as predictable as it was empty. She claimed to have been manipulated, spoke of bad influences, and reconnecting with her essence. Her old phrases about empowerment transformed into vague reflections on redemption and personal growth. But that wasn't redemption. It was damage control. I learned through mutual acquaintances that she had accepted a job at a clothing store in her hometown. Low wages, long shifts, and the stares of those who still remembered her former fame. She had gone from living off collaborations and sponsorships to folding shirts and smiling, pretending she didn't hear the whispers. Chris called it poetic justice. I called it a consequence. That same week, my lawyer finished closing all pending matters, canceled the apartment lease, settled joint purchases, and adjusted the final bills. Every document had its final period, every signature, a clean closure. No arguments, no drama, no need for words. Then a letter arrived, a real handwritten one with a perfume I recognized instantly. On the envelope, My name was traced in that rounded script she used to leave notes on the fridge. I opened it next to the counter and read it just once. It said she had collapsed from stress, that Leo had taken advantage of her loyalty, that she never meant to hurt me. She claimed she missed my calm, that she hadn't known how to value what she had until she lost it. It was half apology, half attempt to rewrite history. I exhaled slowly. It wasn't influence, I murmured to myself. It was choice. That night I went out to the patio. The air was cold enough to sting. I placed the letter in the metal fire pit and lit a match. The flame expanded slowly, devouring the paper from the corners. The ink ran, and her words dissolved before they could cling to anything real. Chris appeared midway through the process with a case of beers and that look he uses when he knows it's better to keep silent. He stood beside me, hands in his pockets, watching the fire consume the last remnants. When it finished, he opened 2 bottles and handed me one. "Closure looks good on you, brother," he said. I took a drink and managed a slight smile. "Yes," I replied. "Peace fits better than she did." Chris laughed. "Are you going to keep saying deep phrases, or do you want me to get you a job writing for heartbroken men?" I smiled sideways. "Too many words, brother, too many words. I like silent endings." That night, Chris and I stood in front of the fire, watching the embers turn into orange dust that the wind slowly carried away. "You know," he said, pointing to the pit, "she'll probably post something about this one day. Healing through fire or some phrase like that." "She can," I replied. "But this wasn't for her audience. It was for me." Chris raised his bottle. Then, "To the distance." "To the distance," I repeated. The ashes scattered into the air and disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the smell of smoke and a feeling of freedom. Chris went inside to watch the game while I stayed for a moment longer, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood. For the first time, they didn't sound like background noise, but like a quiet melody. I looked at the fire pit, the blackened metal, the empty center. There was nothing left to burn. The story of Olivia had come to an end. 6 months can change everything. Over time, the news faded, the comments disappeared, and silence became a kind of sanctuary I didn't know how much I needed. The apartment I moved into after leaving her became just a temporary stop. I ended up moving to a small house in the suburbs, simple, 1 story, with a decent garage and a yard that reminded me of what it was like to have my own space. Work remained stable. I accepted a promotion without making a fuss. No celebrations, just another project delivered on time. The team trusted me. Younger staff often sought advice, and the routine started to feel like rhythm. Waking up at 6, gym at 7, office at 9. Evenings were for the small things: cooking, fixing things, reading, living. The garage became my favorite corner. There, I had an old motorcycle I had bought years ago and never finished restoring. Olivia hated it. She said the noise ruined her recordings, so I had pushed it into a corner where it sat covered in dust and forgotten. Now, it was different. Every afternoon returning from work, I rolled up my sleeves, grabbed a wrench, and lost myself in the sound of turning screws. The smell of oil and metal was worth more than any therapy session. Slowly, the bike began to revive. Chris would show up occasionally, pretending to help, though he mostly just drank beer and talked nonsense. "You know this motorcycle is the healthiest relationship you've ever had?" he joked one night, leaning in the doorway. "At least it doesn't argue," I replied. He let out a laugh. "True, but it also doesn't cook or clean or cheat. So I guess you're tied." "I prefer predictable to complicated," I told him. "To predictable, then, I toast." And we toasted to peace. My life became simple. Gym, work, garage, rest. I stopped seeking noise. I didn't look back at Olivia's world, although her name sometimes popped up by chance. Someone told me she was still posting videos about self-love and healing, pretending nothing had happened. Each post was another layer of varnish on a surface that was already cracked. I didn't judge her. I simply didn't care. Others started to notice. My coworkers said I looked lighter. My mother swore I sounded more present, and Chris insisted I had stopped clenching my teeth when I slept on his sofa. I understood that freedom wasn't being alone. It was not having to justify my peace to anyone. One Saturday, while polishing the bike's tank, I heard the sound of tires at the driveway. I wiped my hands with a rag and looked out. Camille Aranda stepped out of a gray SUV, Sunglasses in hand, hair pulled back. We hadn't spoken since she exposed Leo Fox's lies. Her post went viral for a week and destroyed his reputation. The last I heard, he had left the city, in debt and too ashamed to return. "I didn't think you'd actually be home," she said. "I'm predictable," I replied. "These days, that's a compliment." She smiled. I offered her a bottle of water, and we sat on the porch. The sun reflected on the bike's chrome. "I came to thank you," she said. "If you hadn't told your story, I don't know if I would have had the courage to tell mine." "I didn't do much," I replied. Leo self-destructed. "Maybe. But seeing someone face betrayal without bitterness, that makes an impact." "Anger is expensive," I told her, "and I couldn't afford to keep paying for it." Camille smiled. "I guess we learned the same lesson. Some people don't change. They just reinvent themselves." We talked for over an hour, about everything but the past: music, travel, bad coffee, better days. There was no tension or hidden agenda, just understanding. Two people who had walked through the same fire and emerged without the smell of smoke. When she stood to leave, she looked at the bike. "It's almost ready." "Almost," I said. "The rest is just details." "Like life," she replied with a smile. A week later, I finished the project. Every screw in place, every cable carefully wrapped. I polished the tank until I could see my reflection, a face less furious, more calm. Chris arrived that morning with 2 coffees. "So you finished it," he said, walking around the bike as if it were a work of art. "You even painted it the same color as your old car." "Consistency," I replied. "Ridiculous," he laughed. "Are you going to name it?" "Yes," I said with a half smile. "Freedom." "Of course you are," he sighed. "Now what? Starting a new chapter? Maybe meet someone who doesn't live stream their fights?" "Maybe," I said, "or maybe I'll just go for a ride." "Perfect, but don't crash," he joked. The irony would kill me. I started the engine. The garage filled with a deep, steady roar, the same sound that had so irritated Olivia and that now felt like a pulse in sync with mine. "Too noisy!" Chris yelled over the engine. "Perfect," I replied. He smiled. "Yeah, that's the sound of peace." That afternoon, I rolled the bike out to the driveway. The sun was setting, staining everything gold. I sat with my helmet resting on the handlebars, letting the silence do its work. My phone vibrated. Out of habit, I looked at the screen. A suggested post. Olivia posing on a beach with the caption, "Healing is a journey. Choose love. Choose light." Same filters, same pose, same script. I opened her profile. Dozens of new posts, all impeccable and empty. Without thinking too much, I pressed delete contact and then block. No bitterness, no nostalgia, just the final click of closure. She chose the applause, I murmured. I chose the silence. The engine kept running for a few seconds more, vibrating as if breathing with me. I kept looking at the horizon until the city noise completely faded. In the tank's reflection, I saw a version of myself I didn't remember, calmer, unhurried, with no need to prove anything. I took a breath and let it out slowly. There was no clear destination, nor did I need one. For the first time, I wasn't running from something, but moving toward myself. I twisted the throttle and felt the bike respond, firm and steady. The road opened before me like an unpromised date. I passed the old signs that still advertised the city, and with every kilometer I seemed to leave behind a fragment of everything that had once weighed me down. There was no redemption or punishment, just a silent, almost serene equilibrium. When I reached the outskirts, the sun had already set, painting the sky copper and violet. I pulled over to the side of the road and turned off the engine. The silence was complete, only the sound of the wind through the trees and the faint metallic creak of the cooling metal. I looked at the horizon and smiled. It wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a calm that finally felt like mine. I started the bike one last time, not to flee, but to move forward without looking back. As the landscape merged with the night, I understood that peace isn't sought. It's built piece by piece, just like a machine. And when you have it, it simply works.